Recognizing patterns, connecting the dots, problem solving, finding opportunities and challenges, and discovering pathways in spite of roadblocks. These are Ryan Gravel's stock in trade as an urban thinker, designer, author, builder, and entrepreneur. He believes everyone ought to have a role in shaping the world that shapes us, then proved the point with his master's thesis, which was the genesis for the Atlanta BeltLine, a 22-mile transit greenway that has transformed the city. I'm Gail O'Neill. Join me and my producer, Felipe Barral, as Ryan Gravel lays the foundation for incubating even more ideas on this episode of Collective Knowledge. Because spreading knowledge is the most altruistic thing we can do as human beings. If, we can describe people as having a central organizing principle or philosophy, when I think of you, it would have to be connection and community. Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know.
Have you ever thought about that?
No, I mean, I do think of myself as I'm interested in connections, but I'm also, that's the way that I work, and that my kind of field of practice maybe is about connecting the dots between things. So I'm not an expert really on much of anything, but I like the relationships between things. So the relationship between like urbanization and gentrification with the future of automobiles, vehicle automation, technology, digital privacy, climate, other kinds of things. The intersections of those things is really interesting to me.
You spent time in Paris as a student abroad when you were at Georgia Tech. How did that change what you saw and what you were living, change your perception of connection and what a city could offer?
Oh, it radically changed my worldview. It was pretty amazing. It was a big culture shock. I realized after about a month being there, I'd lost 15 pounds. I was in the best shape of my life because I was eating fresh food and I was walking wherever I went. And the relationship of the built environment of the city and shaping my life, not just physical activity in terms of walking, but access to food by walking or by transit. It opened up what real city life was about and what the infrastructure of the city can do to shape people's lives. It makes a way of life possible. It also limits the kinds of lives that we lead. So for example, from 2 blocks from my apartment in Paris, I could take a subway across town or I could take a high-speed train across Europe. But when I came back from Paris and I lived with my parents in Chambly and got a job where I had to drive across the top end of 285 every day, you really saw the limitations of infrastructure. You saw that I couldn't do that. I couldn't live in that way. I had to drive. I had to drive across 285. I had to do, I couldn't walk to the grocery store. And so I started thinking about how you would reposition a place like Atlanta. How would you adapt the infrastructure systems that we do have to create the kind of lifestyle that we want?
We do want a lifestyle where we're connected. I do believe that. So how is it that we cling to our car culture and to suburban sprawl when it's not contributing to our vitality, our excitement about where we live and how we go about our days? It's not working, I would say. So why do we...
I think that a lot of people don't have the expectation that their community should do those things. They don't necessarily know better. I didn't know better until I went to Paris, And so I don't think people who haven't lived in that kind of lifestyle don't understand that we could do that if we wanted to. That the decisions that we make about where we live, where we shop, who we vote for, all those things actually do play a role in shaping our lives and oftentimes limit what's possible for our lives. But also, seeing it in that kind of light gives you hope that, that we could do something. And as a great example, I love to tell a story about my kids. We live right on the BeltLine at Krog Street, and a couple of years ago, I had to take them to the grocery store with me, and they were complaining about it because they didn't want to get in the car, basically. Yeah. And they said, "Oh, Dad, if we have to go, can we at least ride our bikes?" And I was like, "Yeah, we can ride our bikes. That's what people in Atlanta do. We ride our bikes to the grocery store." Right. They don't know how ridiculous that is. They don't know how unusual that is. I do, and I also know how powerful it is that that's their expectation for Atlanta,
Yes.
and that's their expectation for their lives, that they want to live in a place where you can ride your bike to the grocery store. And of course, from where we live, we can. And it's also the fastest way to get there. It's the safest way to get there. It's the most healthy and sustainable way to get there, is to ride our bikes. And that's their expectation for their lives. So when you look ahead at all the challenges that we're facing, whether that's gentrification or urbanization, the climate changes, and all the other things that are there, but also all the opportunities that those challenges create, they give that kind of a perspective gives you hope that we can get there. And that what we need is not just a bunch of one-off kind of ideas like the BeltLine. The BeltLine's not going to solve all of our problems, but what we need is a cultural momentum, a cultural shift in our expectations and what we want with our lives, because if we want something else, we can get it. The BeltLine is a great example of how the communities of people saw something that they wanted for their future, and now they're getting it, and whether we get everything that we wanted or not actually depends on our willingness to continue to engage and demand those kinds of outcomes, but we can get it if we want.
So the job is not done.
Right. No, not on the BeltLine, and not more broadly for Atlanta or for the region or for our country.
Why is public transportation critical to civic engagement? Can you have a thriving city without public transportation?
I don't think so, especially the way that cities are going, where they're, we see it here in Atlanta, but you see it everywhere, just mass global urbanization. I mean, everywhere, people moving back into cities, and just the sheer density of those means that you have to have shared ways of moving around. It's just the most efficient way to do it. Now, it might be a different technology, it might be something else, but it's not private cars with people alone in their cars. And what's critical about that is that public transit and walking and biking and things like that, but separate from private vehicles, automated or not, it's a social kind of way of moving around. And so in addition to the general mobility, it also provides us with social connectivity, which is really important to the community's vitality, but also to its long-term sustainability, because you have to know each other and love each other in order for it to move forward as a viable, sort of shared, inclusive, kind of outcomes.
We tend to overlook the importance of civic engagement, just seeing one another, looking in one another's eyes. And as you put it so beautifully before, we have to see each other, love each other, to be able to vote for each other. We have moved so far away from that paradigm, and I feel like the answer is places like the BeltLine. I've assaulted you on the BeltLine years ago. Brian, I tend to be exuberant. I think I frightened you that day, but I just had to tell you how much it meant to me. What other kinds of responses have you gotten just walking or cycling on the BeltLine?
Well, all the time. I mean, one of the most beautiful moments was when this little girl, it was before the trail was built, it was just a sea of kudzu right out here, right outside the window here. I was walking down this little footpath that used to follow it. And this little girl was having her birthday on it. She was just so in love with the BeltLine as an idea that she wanted to have her birthday. She was like 10 years old. And you've seen people get, married because of it. Actually, there's a proposal written on the trail right now in chalk. Somebody, will you marry me? Right
outside
there,
right now?
Yeah,
oh,
right there.
We got to go film that, Felipe.
It's really beautiful. So, it's changing people's lives. And what's beautiful, the way it works is that it was a barrier between places, not just the railroad corridor, but the industrial belt, all the old industrial belt properties that follow that railroad really formed a barrier between communities.
Yes.
And now it's the meeting ground. So physically people come to meet together. So you're connecting communities along the way, but also across the tracks. And that just there's just something inherently human about that kind of connection that you don't even have to know that to see. You go to any coffee shop and you eavesdrop on people, especially young people, and it's where they live, it's where they work, it's who they date, it's what they do on the weekend night, and so you can see people kind of organizing their lives around it because it has this kind of life-affirming kind of quality to it that you don't get on 285.
Right.
And that's not to say actually that we couldn't adapt 285 to accommodate a similar kind of approach, but that's a different kind of maybe a larger undertaking.
I wonder if you experienced a reverse culture shock when you came home from Paris.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that I realized that driving across the top end of 285 was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I'd seen a way of life that was better than that. And not to be judgmental about it. There's nothing wrong with that lifestyle. If that's what people want, that's fine, but it's not what I wanted for my life. And yeah, so I started looking for what I wanted to do, and ultimately decided to go back to school in urban planning. Most city planners go to school originally to save the world in some capacity, and then after a while being there, wanted to maintain skills in design, and so stayed on and also got my architecture degree as well. And the BeltLine was, of course, my thesis for those two things. It's urban planning, but it's also design at a city scale. That's kind of the idea.
The irony of places like the BeltLine is that they engender so much community pride and excitement, and I know you go to Singapore and Atlanta's on people's lips because of the BeltLine, but the downside is that sometimes pride can come with a good dose of protectionism. This is mine, this is how I want it to be, this is who belongs there, who doesn't. How do you, or is it even part of your thinking when developing things like this, to make it inclusive as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge for cities. When I was writing my book, Where We Want to Live, one of my favorite interviews that I did was with this woman, Panky Miller. She's a older white woman. She moved to Atlanta in the late 60s, early 70s, and she called Atlanta at that time a wide open place. Atlanta being only a fraction of the regional population during that time was with white flight. She described white flight as intolerance leaving the city. And so what was left behind were people who actually wanted to be there.
Yes.
White people from other parts of the country and who had a more progressive kind of mindset, together with the emerging African American middle class, sort of commingling in this magical way that lots of things happen. And you look at the history of the city, and a lot of really wonderful things happened during that time. And so, but now you look ahead at what's happening now with the growth, people moving back into the city.
Yes.
And I suspect that intolerance is also moving back into cities. And you know, people want to hold on to what they have and not change, like you say, but not changing isn't really an option. Change is coming. The question is, who benefits from that change? Who is the change? Who gets to, benefit, be a part of that change in a positive way? Who has to move out? So, who are we really becomes a real question of what are our values? What do we want that future to look like? And then how do we leverage the change to actually accomplish that kind of outcome? If we based the decisions that we make about transportation, about land use planning, about densities and growth, all these things around affordability, based on our values, and if we value a diverse population of people, then we might change the way that we do things.
Since you wrote the book, Where We Want to Live, where do we want to live? What was your conclusion?
Well, I think the point really is like there's a whole range of answers to that question, right? Some people love living out in a more suburban environment. They like, you get a big yard, you get a big house. There's nothing really wrong with that at all. And if that's what we want, that's fine. If you want to live in a high-rise downtown, that's great too. But there are choices along the way where you end up in there. There are consequences to each of those things. There's expenses that come with that, both to you as an individual, but also to us as a shared society. And I think that we have been subsidizing auto-dependent sprawl for so long. When you look at it, whether through a health lens or equity lens or economic lens or whatever else, it's not really in our best interest. It's a very expensive way to grow. We have enormous subsidies for that. And I think that the idea is to just rethink is that what we want? And if not, what do we want? And what other kinds of things should we be investing in? What other kind of policies should we be putting in place to achieve that other kind of outcome? And what the BeltLine was, as an example of where we want to live, is it's an aspiration for our lives. And the people of Atlanta fell in love with this idea before anybody else. The reason we're doing it is because the public, citizens, fell in love with it. Because like you, they just saw that inherent kind of human connection and what it does to our world, and that it's a good thing. And they fell in love with that, and they started empowering and ultimately obligating their elected officials to do the hard work of putting it together. And I think that if we wanted, similarly, a more inclusive, equitable, diverse population in the world, or a more healthy, sustainable way of transportation systems or whatever else, if we had that aspiration, then people would sort of get on board with that and also support that. So the idea is that where we want to live drives the kinds of decisions that we make about getting there. In a way that's really no different from when sprawl was built. You know,
Yeah.
I tell a story a lot about my grandparents. They moved to the outskirts of their town where they lived in Alexandria, Louisiana. The picture of their, when they got married in 1941, looks like every picture of suburban America in the 40s. You know, they rented rooms to servicemen during World War II. They probably got one of those fancy federal home loans that was only available to white people. And they participated in an American story about an aspiration for where people wanted to live, at least the people who were driving the decisions that were shaping the economy at that time. And all the public and private sector colluded to give them the lives that they wanted.
You've started yet another project, Aftercar.
Right.
What is Aftercar?
So Aftercar is the means to the end, actually. The core project is a new nonprofit called Generator. It's about generating ideas about the future of cities. The idea is that what we've been talking about, like we don't need one idea, we need a whole movement of ideas. And there are a lot of people in the world and in this city that have ideas, but they don't have the platform to share it. Their voice isn't being heard. They need some expert advice and some other things to help them get their ideas up and out in the world, like we did in the early days with the BeltLine. So we're going to create a digital and physical platform for that kind of dialogue, a place where people with expertise can come in and connect with people with ideas who need their expertise, or funding, or volunteer time, or whatever it is. But of course, the great social and cultural movements, and all the great social and cultural movements in world history come out of bars and restaurants. In my world in urban planning, Jane Jacobs was changing the world, fighting Robert Moses and highways and the destruction of Manhattan, and they were organizing on bars on Hudson Street in New York, White Horse Tavern and other places. But here in Atlanta, of course, is the best example of that. Pascal's was the dining room of the civil rights movement. People come together, they have different ideas, they negotiate through conflicts, they organize, and they go out and they change the world. And they break bread together, you look each other in the eye, you see each other, you get to know each other. And it's like your Thanksgiving room, your Thanksgiving table, you know, at home with your parents or whoever your family. You don't agree with everybody, but you love them.
Yeah.
And you see yourself as part of a shared future together that is capable of addressing these big challenges ahead of us. So Aftercar is the for-profit restaurant partner, and they kind of cohabitate together. Aftercar actually funds about 60% of the budget for the nonprofit, so we don't have to keep going around asking people for money. The ideas coming out of Generator are used to animate, activate the space in Aftercar. So Aftercar takes on this Blade Runner, Mad Max kind of vibe. It's just fun, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so you might come into Generator to go through the program and stay on and have a drink or a meal with somebody you didn't know before. Or you might just come in off the BeltLine because it looks cool and you're thirsty or you're hungry, and you see something else that might bring you back for some other bigger, kind of deeper conversation.
Yeah, and a bigger purpose. I was thinking of the Dumago in Paris, and
right.
thinkers and philosophers and
Right.
so on, but when you say Blade Runner, I guess, yes, this would have to be a 21st century proposition, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it's like the
same thing,
concept
though.
of a salon, where you
right.
just come together and you're just exchanging ideas, and as
And
you
so
say.
sometimes very purposeful through like symposia, you know, like panel discussions and workshops and retreats and stuff like that, but also just very casually. So it's not like the restaurant is not going to be like an educational experience necessarily.
Yes.
You can just come in and have a meal. It's going to be good food. It's going to be, you know, social and fun and all of that. But one example of something we thought of that we'll certainly do is like every hour on the hour to have some art performance. So like some poetry slam or 2-minute dance troupe coming through the restaurant. And if we're sitting there eating, we might go right back to what we were talking about, or it might open up some space for a conversation between us or with the next table that kind of expands that conversation to connect with each other in a different way. If people come here and they see that the world around them shapes them, and that they have a role in shaping that world, if that's all they take away, that's going to be pretty beautiful.
So you do realize you are now giving to Atlanta what Paris gave to you. Just a little key that you stuck in the lock and you turned it, and it completely shifts your consciousness, your expectations, your desires, and awakens something inside of you. And I should mention that we're sitting in Aftercar right now. We're in the foreground of Aftercar.
We're in the main dining hall. The bar will be behind us by that window. And
Brian, why does beauty matter?
Beauty is, I mean, it's inspiring, right? I think conventional beauty is important for certain kinds of ways, but I think learning to see beauty in things that are not beautiful is also really powerful. A great example is the Los Angeles River. I mean, I find it just stunningly beautiful, but it's a 51-mile concrete channel. The Army Corps of Engineers paved the LA River in the 30s, paved 80% of a 51-mile long river. What's beautiful about it is what it represents in terms of the future, you know, because it's been destroyed, you know, as an ecosystem, certainly as just what a river is, the concept of a river. But there are people working to turn it back into something else again. It'll never be a wild river again, but there's just something beautiful in that kind of transformation. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not.
Well, yeah, it does. You said that beauty is inspiring, which it is. I just wish I could be inspired by things that, like the LA River, I would feel sad if I just saw this concrete channel that went on for miles and miles and miles.
Well, certainly if that's all you see, then yeah.
So you're seeing something that I'm not seeing.
Well, and see, that's where my obsession with kind of Blade Runner comes in. Blade Runner is a pretty dystopian view of the world, but I actually see a really positive kind of outcome. The whole BeltLine, a lot of people don't know this, but the whole BeltLine is based on this quote from Rem Koolhaas, who's a Dutch architect. And when I was in architecture school and studying in Paris and all that, I was obsessed with Rem Koolhaas. He was doing a lot of writing at the time. He did a fair amount of writing about Atlanta, actually. And he said, you know, don't go to Paris or Amsterdam, go to Atlanta if you want to see what's happening for the future of the city. Because these places are already built, they already are what they are, but Atlanta is going to be a different place in 20 years. And he basically said that as we start to solve the problems that we've created, we have an opportunity to make something really beautiful in the world, and to do, and that Atlanta would be beautiful as Paris or Amsterdam, of course in a totally different kind of a way. And so I'm from that point, and I guess that's also behind the BeltLine and everything else that I do is, you know, you see the problems that we've created, but you see them not only as problems, but as opportunities to make something really beautiful and better, not only for, you know, visually, but better for our lives.
Why is the visual aspect important, though? I mean, the BeltLine could have just been a corridor that connected disparate neighborhoods, that build bridges. It could be kind of ugly, unattractive, but instead we have flowering trees, and we have wildflowers, and a beautiful canopy, and public art. Why was that important to you? Or was it important to you? I don't know.
No, it is important. I actually think that the BeltLine could be a lot more beautiful, and that requires, you know, we built the East Side Trail on the cheap. We didn't have enough money for the lighting and benches and signage and all the other things that come along with it. So once all that comes, of course, when the transit comes, it'll be more beautiful for me. And because of the life that it creates, and you know, people want, you know, we talked about it being this social space, and part of that is because it's physically a place that people enjoy being in. If it was hostile, if it was uninteresting or boring, people would be less likely to come. Now, sometimes they might come just because there's sheer lack of other places to be. But I do think that beauty plays a role.
Voters have voted to support the Metro Rail legislation that's we hope to build here. By what year would you want to see that started? Are we talking about 10, 15, 20 years from now?
No. I think you'll see construction on the transit on the certain parts of the BeltLine within 5 years.
And as we go forward, and there are going to be more votes coming up for or against mass transit, what's your best argument on why Atlanta needs it, and why we should support it on the BeltLine as voters?
Well, transit is the thing that makes the BeltLine for everybody, right? So I'm an able-bodied person, and I can use it to get to work because it's convenient from where I live and where I'm going. And I'm not going very far. But for people but if it's raining, for example, I live about 1.5 miles from here. If it's raining, it's useless. You know, so transit is a thing that makes it work at every time of day and every kind of weather. If you're carrying a load, if you have to go a long distance, a lot of people will be using it not to go somewhere on the BeltLine, but connect into MARTA and then go to the airport or downtown. So it allows those larger kind of connectivity. In the face of change that the city is about to see, sees now, but is it really about to see, the traffic congestion that will result from that is just unbearable. And so the need for free-flowing routes for transit is really important. So from here, conceptually, you'll be able to ride down and connect directly into MARTA, and without ever hitting a traffic jam, go to downtown or the airport, Buckhead, Midtown, Perimeter Center, wherever you need to go. And that's really important for that kind of movement and vitality. The region is about to grow by 2.5 million more people over 20 years. So we're going from 5.5 million to 8 in 20 years. That's like moving Charlotte to Atlanta in 20 years without really doing anything about regional transportation. So the concentration of growth in the inner core area, the inner region that has walkability, that has transit with MARTA, that has these sort of things that the market wants, is really going to be a lot of pressure on that area to grow. The city is anticipating that it will nearly triple its population during that time frame. And so the economic forces that are related to that, the traffic congestion related to that, all these things mean that we have to start to really answer these questions now. I'm disappointed actually by the amount of transit that's funded through the more MARTA plan. It will only fund about 1/3 of the BeltLine in a 40-year horizon, so it's completely inadequate. It'll work for the parts of the BeltLine it's servicing, but not really for others who will really struggle with that, with the changes that will come. So I do think though that, like the trail, before the trail was built, we were selling this idea, this concept. And a lot of people got behind it and they believed it, they could see it. But we were pointing at an abandoned railroad, Right. When the trail opened that first day, anybody who didn't get it goes, oh, I get it now, And then of course, over the ensuing years, you've seen this amazing response to it, both from an economic standpoint, in terms of investment in new apartments and Ponce City Market and all that, but also the people coming to use it just for social life and connectivity and health and commuting and all that. So I think that the same will be true with the transit. So the people who don't get the transit now, when it's there, people are going to be, oh, I get it now. You don't have to go far. I was just in Charlotte last week. They actually have a light rail stretch along a corridor that also has a trail. By comparison, nothing as beautiful as the BeltLine, but basically the same thing, and it works easily, and it's perfect. So we'll get there. People who don't see it will see it.
For the people who don't see Ryan, but who say, this Ryan Gravel kid is onto something, what are 3 things we can do to cultivate connectivity in our lives, whether at work, play, where we live, even in our own homes? Our homes are getting so much bigger than they used to be that we don't necessarily have to see each other, even if we're in the same family. So what are 3 tips you have?
Well, once we open Aftercar, you can come out and have a meetup at Aftercar. I do think it's going to be a great way to connect with people. So a lot of people especially people who are experts in their field, they don't have a way. They are experts and they're willing to share. There's so many people in Metro Atlanta that would love to give a couple of hours of their time to somebody who really needed their help, but they have a hard time figuring out who that would be. How would they find that? And so Generator will really be a matchmaker for those people. We'll have a lot of people who have ideas, and then we'll have a network of people who want to help and volunteer their time. So, the support for me personally, and by creating the space, anybody who wants to support it and make it happen is welcome to join in the effort. It's going to be fun. I think just more broadly, just generally connecting with people and taking time to see and find places to meet people who are different from you and understand them better. That's always a good idea.
Okay, so we can come to Aftercar. We can just put ourselves in different situations. Is there a 3rd tip you have for?
I don't know.
Maybe walk through a drain pipe or, or you know what it'll be for me, thanks to you? I'll look at something that might make me go like this and re-examine it and try to see the potential as opposed to what I consider
I think
lacking.
if you see the world around you as a set of decisions that resulted in that, and that you have a role in shaping what those decisions are, and you start to see things that you might not have seen before. Right?
Thank you. Thank you for the wild ideas you have, for seeing beauty in things that others might see ugliness, but seeing the potential and getting us excited about it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing it.
Coming up next on Collective Knowledge, Steve Nygren, founder and CEO of Serenbe.
Beauty matters in so many ways, and it's beauty in just the everyday thing, whether it's appreciating nature and honoring it, or making sure that the proportions of a building or a table or whatever we're encountering is a proportion that, again, speaks to it. Now, that's a pleasant thing, but now research is coming out that beauty actually affects how our brain and parts of our brain work, and especially the parts that affect the messages we're sending to the physical body on health.
Don't forget to share this episode, like us, or send us a comment. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and please subscribe to our channel on YouTube.